Well, a good evening to all of you. And I am very excited about tonight and obviously about tomorrow. And I will be very brief, but I just want to make 3 remarks about the next 24 hours, which I think in my years here, I like to think that the 24 hours we spend beginning tonight and through tomorrow afternoon and the evening, I think it's about as rich and interesting and to me affirming and provocative a 24 hours as we have on campus. And that says a lot when you think about what we do every day here. Here are the three things I'd suggest that you keep in mind as we enter this day or so. The first purpose is an obvious one. That is, we're honoring Martin Luther King, who is just one of the great American heroes. I think by any standard, every historian would agree upon that premise, that he's really one of the most remarkable leaders that this nation has ever produced. And to stop and recognize him, I think, is a duty and an honor. The second thing is, I would suggest this. I would suggest that you go into this night and tomorrow with a keen interest in the kind of intellectual stimulation that happens here. We're going to hear from Majora who is a visionary and a courageous and brilliant leader. And the fact that we have her on campus in this room tonight is absolutely remarkable. And then tomorrow you'll hear, if you're at the prayer breakfast, you'll hear from Commissioner Esty. And you'll go to a workshop. And if you looked at the diversity of topics, it's absolutely remarkable. So I suggest and I welcome you to enter into this with a real interest and a welcoming mind. And then the last thing is the obvious one. And I think for me, I sense it most tomorrow when we're back in here in the afternoon. This 24 hours allows us to delight in and marvel at and be inspired by the incredible diversity and the richness of humanity that is this campus. Diverse perspectives and experiences makes for a much more interesting learning place. And tomorrow, I think you'll see it in particular when we're back here in the afternoon. So it's with those 3 ideas in mind, just to frame it, and with a great sense of honor for what we're doing tonight, I just would ask Maddie and Tommy to come forward to make introductions and to start us off. Maddie?
Good evening. This year, due to the tragic event of Zoe Climley's death, MLK Day is being dedicated in her honor. After Ms. Lee first told me of this, I started to think about how I could relate such a globally influential leader such as Martin Luther King Jr. to Zoe. While thinking about this, I thought of how Zoe's death is similar to Mr. King's, as they both have caused people to stop and think about their lives. Martin Luther King Jr. was a man who helped shape every person in this room's life. Like every young student, I was taught about his life from my earliest memories of education. My first memory of MLK Day was when I thought MLK Day was missing the letter I, and that it was actually Milk Day. Classic mix-up. But from the beginning, I knew the day was important as I learned about his life and the causes he stood for. Every year, there is a day devoted to discussing the legacy he left and how people can keep carrying out his dreams. This is where I think Zoe and him can be compared. Zoe's death has left many people stopping and thinking about her life and how we can keep carrying out her dreams through things such as waving to strangers just to brighten their day. During the next 24 hours, we will all have multiple chances to think about the quest that both Zoe and Martin Luther King Jr. strive to complete. That making a person's day better is what life is all about. By dedicating this year's MLK program to Zoe, we have an opportunity to celebrate another life and wonderful spirit that embodied the very essence of the reason why we celebrate the legacy of Dr. King. Thank you.
Last spring, when the Summer Reading Committee announced that The Legacy would be our summer reading book, many students were not pleased. Even when we advertised its brevity and sang praises of its large font and spacious margins, I still often heard, "Oh no, anything but a book about global warming." When David Suzuki came to Taft, many students were more perplexed by the fact that he described the economy as a dragon than inspired by the message of one of the world's leading environmentalists. Why? Our generation has been continually pounded with the tough facts that face the future of our world. So often, we find those facts, tough as they are, difficult to bear and easier to tuck away, to try to forget. We see no clear solution in sight, and that, in many ways, is terrifying. But as we stand poised to deal with the sins of generations past, stand ready to preserve the world for generations future, we must be hopeful that we can inspire change. As students of Taft, as friends, as people touched by the light and inexhaustible spirit of Zoe Climley, we must, to quote anthropologist Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
One, two. You like gospel music? Put your hands together. Oh, yeah. Lord, help me to hold out. Lord, help me to hold out. Help me to hold out. Lord, help me to hold out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Help me to hold out. Until my change comes. Come on, Tristan, tell the story.
My way may not be easy.
Come on.
You did not say it would be easy. But when I get lost, I can't find my way. You promised you would be with me.
Everybody
Sing it now.
say, Lord.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lord,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah.
my way may not be easy.
yeah.
You did not say it would be. Promised you would be with me.
Everybody now, Lord. Come on, put your hands together, everybody. Help me to hold out, yeah. Help me to hold out, yeah, 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 Lord. Help me to hold out until my
Hello, everyone. Welcome this evening. You all know by now I'm really excited for tonight to be finally happening for a lot of reasons. First, it's not only an important MLK celebration, it's also Mrs. Fru's birthday, so everyone give her a big round of applause. But you've heard enough from me in the last 2 weeks, so I'm going to pass the torch off to a much more eloquent speaker than myself. And let me introduce to you Miss Majora Carter. She's currently the founder and president of Majora Carter Group and host of the Peabody Award-winning public radio series, The Promised Land. She founded and led Sustainable South Bronx from 2001 until 2008, when very few were talking about sustainability, and even fewer in a place like the South Bronx. By 2003, Majora coined the term green the ghetto as she pioneered one of the nation's first urban green-collar job training and placement systems and spearheaded legislation that fueled demand for those jobs. Her 2006 TED Talk was one of the first 6 videos to launch their groundbreaking website. Then in 2008, her consulting company, Majora Carter Group, has exported climate adaptation, urban revitalization, and leadership development strategies for business, government, foundations, universities, and economically underperforming communities. She is a distinguished alumni of Wesleyan University and has a long list of awards and honorary degrees, including a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, the New York Post Liberty Medal for Lifetime Achievement, and New York University's Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Humanitarian Services. She is also listed as one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs by Goldman Sachs. And in 2010, she was honored with a key to the city by the mayor of Bridgeport, Connecticut. So we are thrilled to welcome Majora back to Connecticut, and while we'll only enjoy to learn from her more in the next 24 hours or so, one fun fact I'm sure she will talk to us more about is she once dreamed of coming to Taft. Though she ultimately attended the Bronx Labs School, I would now love to invite her up on stage and hopefully fulfill one of her childhood dreams of one day wearing a Taft shirt. So please welcome Majora Carter. There you go. Thank you.
That is really funny. It is very true. Hold on one sec. There we go. I totally, back, and you'll see why a little bit when I was a kid, why coming to a place like Taft was just the biggest dream that a kid like me could have had. And so it is really funny to be here. I'm like, oh my gosh, and now I'm on the stage. So this is kind of fun. But anyway, I'm so happy to be here with you, and I'm just excited about sharing with you today, in particular, in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because a lot of folks might not know about his history, and that he wasn't just focused on racial justice and in the evolution of his leadership and his role. He understood that it wasn't just about racial inequality. It was also about economic inequality and environmental inequality, because to Dr. King, of course, injustice anywhere was a threat to justice everywhere. So it made perfect sense that he was looking at the earth and all the things that impacted everything and everyone on it as a very strategic way of thinking about equality. So, but with that, the story I'd like to tell you is a true one, and it begins right here with my parents, who they're both from down south, Georgia and South Carolina. They came up north looking for their great American dream because they were fleeing a form of domestic terrorism, which was Jim Crow in the South in the 1940s. So they both came up looking for their great American dream, ended up settling in a place called Hunts Point in the southeasternmost section of the South Bronx in New York City. And at the time, it was a mostly white working class community. And people were literally able to walk to work from the residential area into the industrial section where there was light manufacturing going on, living wage jobs for people who had them. And later on, also folks came looking for their great American dreams from down south, and then later on the Caribbean, mostly black and brown people. White flight happened. The highway construction boom also happened, which meant that our roads in our cities and in all of our areas were being built more for cars, often with very little wherewithal given to people and how they lived. And so this, for example, is a piece of the Bronx called the Cross Bronx Expressway. right on top, right underneath where it was a thriving community with businesses, and people lived there. People given less than a month's notice before they were told that a highway was going to be built over where they once lived and thrived. This is not the first financial crisis we've ever been through as a country, which I'm sure you've all read about in your various history classes. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was also one as well, and it was a really horrible one. There was a term called redlining was introduced at that time by banks, basically, where they were not going to make any kind of investment in places that they deemed uninvestable in. So if you wanted a mortgage or if you wanted to get a business improvement loan, and if you lived in one of those places, you didn't get it. And so what would happen if by chance you wanted to do something, expand your business or whatever, it didn't happen. And unfortunately, things would fall into disrepair. And this is around the time that I came in. I like to think of this as one of my very early networking opportunities. I'm sure I'm on the phone with Santa Claus telling him that I'm here with the Easter Bunny, and he said to tell you I've been a really, really good girl, so hook me up, please. But this is what I grew up with. Remember that financial disinvestment. Banks were not investing in those communities like this. Landlords, because there wasn't any kind of investable future for them, they were often doing things like torching their buildings, committing arson, or paying someone to commit arson for them, in order to collect insurance money, because that's where the money came from. And so, dead or homeless or injured tenants notwithstanding, this was what we kind of lived with. And so this is what I grew up with. So you can kind of understand why the idea of Taft would seem really attractive to a little kid. But again, what I grew up with kind of paved, these were the playgrounds of our youth, believe it or not, because at the same time, social programs like parks and music and art programs were not being allowed to happen in our community. Funding was cut for those as well. But I remember growing up, and seeing my neighborhood on the nightly news as this place. It was a poster child for urban blight, and only pimps and pushers and prostitutes could possibly be from a place like that. Even though, in my own experience, not to say that bad things didn't happen, we were very much a community, and those of us that were left behind. My parents bought their home in the 1940s. They couldn't sell it. Like, no one was going to buy that thing. But it made a home for me and a lot of other people as well. But the reality of the situation was that it did have a lot of issues. My brother, who had actually served 2 separate tours in Vietnam, came home, and we were all proud because he got himself a job at the post office, and we were like, yes, he's going to marry this lovely girl named Renee. And he was gunned down in the neighborhood next door to ours as a result of gun violence with a gang. So all of that kind of economic disinvestment really paved the way for much of the social problems that we experienced, and also a lot of the environmental issues that we dealt with as well. So remember, there was a lot of manufacturing in these communities, a walk-to-work neighborhood. All those factories left. And what took its place, in those industrial areas was this kind of stuff. Waste facilities, and later on power plants, sewage sludge pelletizing plants, and things of that nature. And of course, it wasn't just icky things to have in your neighborhood. They also had an impact on one's health as well. So we had one of the country's highest childhood asthma hospitalization rates. Diabetes and obesity have everything to do with, not everything, but an enormous amount to do with how your community is planned. Even when we were a kid, believe it or not, we would go outside and play. And so we got a certain level of physical activity. But if parents are thinking that their kids are going to be hit by a truck, or that they're already compromised, respiratory systems are going to be further compromised, they're probably not going to let them go outside and get the same level of physical activity that we did. You add to that living in a food desert and not having access to decent, healthy, affordable food, with quality, then chances the diabetes and obesity rate will continue to rise, which they are. And last but definitely not least, 2006, Columbia University did this study that conclusively linked proximity of fossil fuel emitting sources to learning disabilities in young children. And where do you find many of these fossil fuel emitting sources? You find them in low income, generally, almost exclusively actually, in low income communities and or low income communities of color. And it's as if we were making this direct kind of path, and we know that poor kids who do poorly in school statistically go to jail in this country. Statistically. So it's as if we were creating this direct pathway from poverty into prison. So I only moved back home. I went to Wesleyan. I didn't go to Taft, but I got myself into a pretty good school. I went to the Bronx High School of Science, and with the goal of making sure that I got out of my neighborhood, and I did. I went away to Wesleyan. I had no desire to go back home to my neighborhood except for the fact that my mother made the most exquisite fried chicken, and that's why I was going to go back home. But, I'd visit, whatever. But anyway, I started graduate school at NYU, and realized that I couldn't have like the really cool Manhattan pad of my dreams and go to grad school at the same time, so I found the cheapest place I could, which was my parents' house. And which felt like a huge defeat, but actually it was the biggest gift in the world because I got to go back to my community with a fresh set of eyes. I had been away for a while. I had experienced life in a bunch of different places, and I realized that the community that I thought I knew, I didn't really know much about it. Like, for example, I felt, because I internalized it too, that, there must be something wrong with the people to make these kind of things happen to us. And I didn't realize at the time that there were actually all sorts of regulations and institutions that specifically targeted and and used the vulnerability of a poor, politically vulnerable community of color as a place to put these environmentally burdensome facilities. And I thought, I see that now. I could pretend I didn't see it, or I can do something about it. So that was the time our city was planning on building this huge waste facility on our waterfront, and I got very deeply involved in that, in encouraging our city and our state to see us more than just a place to dump. And that was one of the most exhilarating, amazing moments and periods of my life, because I realized I could actually influence the kind of change that I wanted to see happening on the ground. And it was really, to this day, still some of the most extraordinary things that have happened, because we got to see how people could see themselves in completely different ways and empower themselves in a way that I think Dr. King would have been very, very proud of. But to me, the advocating, for a more sustainable future didn't just end with straight advocacy for better policies. It was also about what are the projects that we're going to use in order to make those things come to life. Because it wasn't just, it wasn't that Dr. King just only wanted to have civil rights legislation just for the sake of having it. It was so that people could have a better life and have it more abundantly and see it and live it and experience it. Like in this world, not wait till we go to heaven to do it. And so I wanted to see more of that. And so what I want to share with you right now is quickly the process that I've been using to help make some of those projects come to life. And so I realized that what we needed to do was actually do things on the ground there. And this is the actual way that we do it. We identified the market need, and then we designed an attractive solution to help make it happen. Then you look for angel investment in your idea, or it could just be an influencer, someone who had a lot of influence, or a group of people who had some good influence to help make something happen. And then you launch something, because you've got to show people that things could change. And then you don't just sit back on your haunches and just go, oh, look what I did, and marvel at it. You actually have to take in the information that you get from people about your idea, and then you refine it. And that's when you reiterate and expand your model, and hopefully have made a change in someone's life. And so to start, again, I came back to the community and was working on this solid waste management plan and helping the city understand that we could actually have a much better one that didn't disproportionately discriminate against poor communities of color in the city. And at that time, I kept getting these notices from this group, actually the U.S. Forest Service, who was interested in developing, restoring the Bronx River. And I only knew that we even had a Bronx River in the Bronx because I saw it on a subway map. I'd never visited it, didn't, whatever, it was there. And, but we kept getting these little notices. At the time, I had a big dog who took me jogging one day and led me into this park. And led me into this dump, which at that point I knew could become a park. The community had already articulated that a need in the community was better, safer places for kids to play. Now, this doesn't quite look like it, right, at this point, but we worked very hard because we knew it was a need, and the solution was turning it into a park. And we worked to get people to help us, with cleanups. We got all sorts of different types of support from both the public and the private sector to help make it happen. This is one of my favorite pictures. Like, this is just one of the cleanups. This is how this place was dumped upon so intensely. And this was our beta version. Not much. But weeping willows grow really quickly. That's why we planted them. But we got this little path done, whatever. But then we looked around and realized that, we didn't really have a culture of people going to parks, mostly because we didn't have any. So we had to continue to build, the culture around going to parks in our community. So we had to develop programmings. That was us learning from the projects and refining them. So we got things like environmental stewardship programs, boat building programs, canoeing programs to operate in that site, and getting people out on the water. And because of all those kind of activities that we brought to bear on this little teeny piece of land, we were able to get the attention of some pretty big folks. And so that was the big little piece that we got $3 million worth. This was me at the groundbreaking for the Hunts Point Riverside Park, and I love this picture so much because, I'd worked 7 years to build this park, and I'm just posing for my picture, thank you very much. And my mayor and the Parks Commissioner are doing all the work. I'm like, I did all of it before, so yeah, you should do it now. But it went from that's our little beta version to this. And this is the Hunts Point Riverside Park. And this was it, actually literally a few days after it was put into place, and back in 2006. And it's become this incredible place for folks to hang around in. And I've also got married there pretty soon after it happened. And this is the dog that pulled me into that park and got us that first little grant that helped launch that project. And this is us. And so yes, we are now a national award-winning park, and that's my puppy Xena, as with her well-deserved award. Unfortunately, we had to put her down last year, but she did make my career and help support the community in such a tremendous way. So it really is her award. So another market need that we had, in the community, again, much of the infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, it was definitely, people paid more attention to how trucks move rather than how people move, which meant there were some fatalities and injuries with regard to people moving. So safer streets, really important. Next, diabetes and obesity. If people don't feel safe walking on streets, it's going to be very difficult for them, or bicycling on them, it's going to be very difficult for them to get, just squeak in easily physical activity into their daily lives. And also stormwater management. As the environment continues and the climate continues to change, we're going to be dealing with different levels of storm surges and everything else. So how do we deal naturally with stormwater management, especially just right now, is very, very important. So having ways to deal with that too. So stormwater management, physical activity, safe streets, really important that we have to deal with. So the solution. Those were the needs that we had. How do we make those things happen? And the solution was a project called a greenway. And a greenway is very simply, it's a dedicated pedestrian and bicycle pathway. And it's a form of transportation. And that's it. So our seed money was a $1.25 million federal transportation proposal that I wrote. And we got that and was able to develop the design for the greenway. And once we had that design, it was for an 11-mile network of on-water, and on-street bike paths, and just all sorts of green infrastructure associated with it, so it would manage stormwater better, all that really groovy stuff. And because we were ready for it, we were then, able to, we had a little beta version, and all it was, and the beta version was specific to just making the streets a bit calming the traffic, to make it so that there'll be less fatalities and injuries, period. So, not all that attractive, but these little medians served a very deliberate purpose. And, we planted a few stick trees, in it as well, so it was kind of pretended to be nice. But the real thing that happened was because that feasibility study was done, we got enough attention from public, both city, state, and federal folks as well. And we were able to raise more than $50 million to start doing projects like this, which had tremendous stormwater management potential and also just provided this really lovely, aesthetically pleasing place for the local community as well. And I have to say, about almost half of that was through the economic stimulus package of 2008. And I'm very excited to say that still to this day, I think we were the only community-initiated, non-fossil fuel burning transportation project that was funded by that stimulus package, which I'm very, very proud of. Yeah, down in the South Bronx, woohoo! But this part is my favorite piece because a greenway is simply, it's a linear path. And all it does is it often connects you to much bigger parks. This little piece of, the South Bronx is only separated by 25 feet of water from this huge park called Randall's Island that sits between Queens, the Bronx, and Manhattan, and it's 400 acres. So this path, when it's completed, is going to provide us access into that as well. So this is like my favorite part, which I just adore. And another market need that we had in the community was jobs. We have more than a 25% unemployment rate in the community. So how are we going to look at ways to create real living wage jobs for people as well? One of those things that we wanted to do was help create a more of a financial as well as a personal stake in the improvement of the environment as we worked on all these projects. So we started one of the country's very first green-collar job training and placement systems, which means we trained folks and we got them jobs as well, and in particular in ecological restoration. So things like learning how to do, we started with wetland restoration because we had this big river that nobody knew we had. And so we worked on that needed a lot of restoration. And then there was also urban forestry management, learning how to clean up contaminated land or brownfield remediation, and also green roof installation as well. And because of that, we were able to, and so we worked specifically with the folks starting in our community, and then later on we became a citywide program. Now, our beta version was we didn't really know what we were doing. There was no precedent set out there that we could even follow. So our beta version was very expensive. It was about $23,000 for a 5-month-long job training program. Obscenely expensive because that was just not a big rate. It was not a lot for the amount of people that we were able to train. So we felt like we needed to do better. We reiterated the model, and within less than a year, we were able to get down the cost of the job training program down to less than $7,000, which meant we were able to train like 10 times more people. So it worked, it was inverse proportionally, but really wonderfully because we were able to continue to boast that kind of success rate, which meant, and then for us that was huge because so many of the folks that we worked with were either generationally impoverished or people that were in and out of the criminal justice system. So having gainful employment helped keep people out of that system, which was really important to us, and I think to the world at large. So the interesting thing about all of this was the work that I did when I was working in the South Bronx. And since then, I've gone off, and since 2008, actually, I've been working as a consultant. I do speaking, I do advisory all over the country, and actually around the world as well, trying to help people show that you don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one, and that there's ways we can help each other do that, regardless of what sector that you're in. And so what I found to be really discouraging as I went through my life over the past several years around the country was that I noticed that there's really only 2 kinds of real estate development, in particular in poor communities. They're only designed to do 2 things. One, if there's an assumption if the area gets better, that the poor people that live in it are going to be displaced, or gentrification. Or the other kind is there's an assumption, and all sorts of policies that help make it so, that those communities are destined to stay poor. And I thought, I think we can be a little bit more creative than that. Especially on the poverty maintenance side, where in those communities, instead of seeing things like good places for you to buy food or different things that you need to keep your house up, you would have to leave the neighborhood to find it, but you found plenty of things like liquor stores or 99-cent stores instead of places where you can build financial equity, such as banks or credit unions. Instead, you'd find check cashing stores, payday loan places, and things of that nature. And last but definitely not least, you would find super huge amounts of highly subsidized affordable housing. And so all of those things put together did nothing except concentrate poverty. Because who else is going to live in a community like that with all of those things in it except for other poor people? And what does that mean, for the quality of the life of people that live in those communities? And I started thinking back about, well, was there a time, in our recent or not so recent history where there was a lot of more economic diversity within our communities, where were just these very strict things like it's either the very wealthy or the very poor? And I started thinking about pre-civil rights, where in many cases, if you were in black communities, you had to live in black communities if you were black. Because it didn't matter if you were a doctor or a janitor, you weren't going to go anyplace else because it wasn't going to be allowed. And there was this sense of social cohesion amongst them because there had to be this level of interaction because yes, there was racial segregation, but there was economic diversity, and there was a sense of aspiration that you saw other folks of different economic levels, different lifestyles, living within close proximity of you. And there was, I think, a level where you had to care a bit more about your fellow human being because they were there. Out of sight, out of mind is very, very real. So having that sense, and I started thinking like, well, wow, so what happened? And I was like, oh, there is this unintended consequence to integration. Because when folks were able to move out of these communities because they economically had the means to do so, they did. But what did that mean for the folks that were left behind? In many cases, there was definitely a sense of aspiration, of hope. And I think on some level, much of that hope left. I mean, I kind of experienced that when my neighborhood started to burn. The families that could afford to go left. And it just left the rest of us. And there was a sense that we were left behind and were worthless and valueless. And in many cases, that's the way some of us acted. Not everybody, but when you've been left behind. So I started thinking, is there a way to use real estate development strategically as a platform for social, environmental, and economic transformation in a community? I mean, the same way we use it to gentrify poor people out or continue to keep them poor and just, pretend to make life better for them because you're building more affordable housing. Is there something else in the middle that we can do? And I started thinking, I do believe so. How about we do that? How about we think about developing models for increasing economic diversity through mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development within these communities, and basing it on a few things. Number one, this kind of makeup that you see here. This is a portrait of or a map of my neighborhood, but the topography is very similar to what happens in a lot of post-industrial American cities. The orange part is the residential section. The blue part is the industrial area. And there's always like a little place in the middle, the place that we call the hinge area, that is where the two kind of intersect, but in many cases, nothing much goes on there because it was the boundary area between the two. So, but also if you look at again, this kind of configuration, very common to a lot of different places. If you look for the assets there, and again, if you're like the same way that when I came back to my neighborhood, I didn't see any assets. I was like, this is a horrible place, I want to leave. And a lot of people do think that about the communities. We're actually taught to measure success by how far we can leave those communities. But when you look around, and we deeply look around, you will find value everywhere. So for example, we did have this waterfront. Most of us didn't know we had it, but it was there. And we also have this fabulous access to public transportation. Awesome. So for that, again, keep that in mind. But in terms of the approach, the things we really wanted to see was mixed income housing. The kind of housing, yes, you always want to have affordable housing for many different levels of people, in particular poor folks, but it doesn't mean that you're stuck in that housing because we want to create new opportunities for you to move up the economic ladder, but more on that in a second. You also want to create housing that's nice enough for folks who could afford to live elsewhere. So you have to have both of those things in it as well. And then like the whole idea that when people, just because a person is born poor, doesn't mean they have to stay poor, that's a radical idea in a lot of poverty alleviation work. Because it's kind of like you're always, some people who do that work are just putting Band-Aids on poverty and not necessarily trying to seriously counteract it through accessible job creation and doing industries that way. So looking at what are the economic trends and making sure that we help people participate in those type of trends through dedicated supports around training and education. And things we've identified, technology. You know, you do not have to have a CS or an engineering degree in order to participate in it. And there's a whole range of jobs to do that, but you do need the training to make it happen. Secondly, apparel. Different types of apparel, from outdoor gear and some haute couture as well. The appetite for outsourcing everything overseas, that is slowly coming. You know, people are starting to get hip to the fact that that might not be as economically feasible as it once was. And then there's also the idea of local dollars circulating throughout your economy. In poor communities, a dollar goes into that community and it almost immediately goes out because there's almost no local ownership of most of the goods or services within those communities. And you can test the type of economic health of a community by how many times a dollar circulates through it. In a healthy one, it's generally 14 to 16 times before it leaves, because you've got places to spend money at, whether it's your local laundromat or a restaurant or all sorts of places, anything in between. And then definitely, last but not least, great public open space. It is the great democratizer. When it's done well, it supports those kinds of positive human interactions that remind people that they're in it together. So that's parks and you know, even greenways and medians, things of that nature, just informal opportunities for people to get together. So on the technology front in particular, as we started thinking about, well, ways to move people into the technology divide, because as you know, we are firmly in the tech age right now. And there seems to be, you know, and right now, and I think as we move forward into that, tech is going to rewrite completely our social interactions. It already has. So in order to continue, you know, this transformation that the world's going through, I think it behooves us to have as many voices participating in that kind of conversation as possible. So people like to talk sometimes about the tech divide, you know, that poor communities don't have access to technology. Not true anymore. You know, smartphones, you know, can do more than the supercomputers, you know, of old did. And, you know, if you know how to use them. And so the divide is not at all about access to technology. It's more about, you know, are you simply a consumer of it, or are you a producer? And you want to be on the producer side. And with the way the nature of tech is happening right now, a lot of folks can actually be a part of the production. And we have enough resources to help make that happen if we do it properly. And so the whole idea here is that this was a fab lab, and it's short for Fabrication Laboratory. We worked with MIT, their fab lab, and all it means is you connect personal computers with fabrication machines. And with it, once you know the software, you can use it to design pretty much anything. It's called rapid prototyping, 3D printing, you know, sometimes as well. And the whole idea is that you can create pretty much anything. In this era of rapid customization, everything from clothing, there's even a surgeon that's using it to create organs for human transplant. And you know, this kind of fab lab, you couldn't create organs for human transplants. But the idea here was that we, you know, brought this mobile unit into the South Bronx because we wanted people to see themselves as creators and inventors in their own right, and give them the tools to actually do so. And so what we also challenged them to do, folks that use this program, was think about looking for raw materials within the local community. Like, for example, these wooden pallet boxes. My neighborhood is actually home to one of the world's largest food distribution centers. And a lot of it comes in on these pallet boxes, and then they're often, you know, shipped away to somebody else's neighborhood. Actually, Connecticut takes a bit of this. I'm sorry to say, I really am. But some of the kids realized that, also just so you know that we lived in a food desert, and how does it make sense that there's a world food distribution center in my community? Because it gets trucked in and trucked out. Most of it doesn't stay in the community. That's how that happens. So, but these wooden pallet boxes were interesting because some young people in the program realized that if you pulled them apart, you know, and lashed the wood together, you created a program, designed a program to do this, you could actually create this kind of furniture. So this was a really wonderful, completely legal side hustle for many of the kids that went through this program. But going back, again, well, staying on technology right now, and in particular, this is moving into the accessible job creation and technology that we're so interested in, is we are firmly in a multi-platform world. You know, everybody wants everything to work on every bit of technology, no matter how old or new it is, and that's just the way we're so used to things happening right now. We are also in a world that is becoming more and more diverse by the second. You know, the New York area, we were no longer majority white back in 2011. And obviously, I'm sure you all know, demographers are predicting that by 2014, America will no longer be majority white. So how do we deal with this kind of different acts, this level of diversity that we've never had in this country, you know, levels of technology that we've never seen before either, you know, and the fact that we are seeing, you know, even in poor neighborhoods, we know there's money, but it's not staying in there. But we know people are spending it. And we know we've got, especially in many poor communities, you know, of color, people will spend money on things like technology. I love this picture. This is, you know, kids online at a Mac store for some new product. And if you just look down the line, most of them are kids of color. Because where do we spend our money? Believe me, we spend a lot of it on this. So they've got that cultural vernacular around it. But we're also, as a society, being undereducated and producing less and less educated people as time goes on. So we've got a country that's becoming more diverse, in many cases more poor, and in many cases also not as well educated as we would like for every American to be. So for that, one of the things we realized we had to, in order to bring some of these together, and in particular create accessible jobs around this stuff, was we started a technology education and entrepreneurship program called Startup Box South Bronx. And the whole idea is how do we, you know, help increase the community's opportunity to participate in the tech economy as a producer, not just as a consumer. And so we're doing things like we're going to be opening up a storefront office and then start encouraging things like speaker series and seminars in order to just inculcate the community in the tech world. But we started last year, we worked in a local high school and did a coding program. So went in, we were teaching young kids how to code, and within just not even a week, they were designing their own video games, which are now available on Google Play. And these are 14 and 15-year-olds who've never even thought of themselves that way. Another thing that we did was we partnered with Nickelodeon, and one of our advisory board members at Startup Box is the games director at Nickelodeon. So he's responsible for like 100 different games at the very least, and you know, under his watch. And he was the one who told us about the fact that there's a line item within every software developer's budget, definitely every game developer's budget, called QA, which stands for quality assurance. And so yeah, you may know how to make a game, but you need to also understand that it works the way it was intended to work. And there's literally somebody else at the other end, after you make the game, trying to break it. Make sure that, you know, when you go and you play a game and you're supposed to be shooting somebody's head off over there, I know that's more of a violent one, you know, but that you actually, it looks like that happens, right? And if it doesn't, then it's got to be fixed. So you're learning about all the bugs in the system and you're re-engineering it to make sure that it works the way it was intended to do. So that quality assurance is actually an incredible entry-level job into the software world. And so we did a pilot with them back in August, and we're doing with another games developer pretty soon. And the idea is to train as many people as possible so that we can actually become the kind of subcontractor for QA within the states. And so we're near sourcing jobs in order to help make that happen, and providing an accessible job future, one with dedicated career ladders. Like, for example, the head of electronic arts, one of the biggest game developers in the world, probably bigger than most film studios, the head of electronic arts started as a QA games tester. So talk about career ladders, it is possible in many, many ways. So we're developing that as an opportunity, as a job creation vehicle starting in the South Bronx. But ideally, we want to see this stuff happening all over the country. And these numbers are from way back in 2011. 2010. So the numbers for the testing market globally has actually gone up a lot since then. So we know that there's opportunities in order to really peel off some of that work, bring it back to communities like the South Bronx, and give people opportunities to work within those areas as well. And so to go back to the site itself, this is actually a former juvenile detention facility. Actually, my father was a janitor in this place when it was opened back in the 70s, but it was recently closed, and the city's going to open it up for redevelopment proposals, and we're really interested in competing for this and to do our kind of version of mixed-income housing and mixed-use commercial development as a way to where America's already being reurbanized, but doing it in a way that actually includes the people that are there rather than not. So remember I mentioned about this hinge area and how like this is the place where the residential and the industrial area kind of meet up, but nothing really happens, and this is a perfect example of it because, you know, one side you've got a jail, the other side you've got a truck engine rebuilding spot, you know, some parking lots, and also like an illegal chop shop down at the end of the block. But what really people know what this site's used for is late at night, it's a good place for a trucker to go pick up a prostitute because it's that desolate. And so that kind of activity can happen there. But imagine if this was what you saw on that site. The kind of activity that I just talked about would not be as easy to do in a place like this. You know, where you've got an active street life, you know, that encourages positive interactions, commerce, and things of that nature. And so the point here is not that we just work to build this lovely little spot, you know, in this area, but that what we're doing raises the bar for the type of real estate development that happens in these communities. And in particular, the kind that we're working on is not at all about you know, going and buying up land and then speculating and building it up. We're actively working with many of the folks that are there, the landowners that are there right now, who've toughed it out, you know, during the times when the community wasn't really great, when it was on the nightly news and nobody wanted to invest in it. And we're saying to these landowners, don't sell your land to the next speculator that comes, because you know what, the neighborhood is changing, but you should be a full participant as this community gets better. You know, be your own gentrifier, for the love of God. And, you know, be a part of the development that comes in. And so as we work to create affordable workforce housing and the kind of commercial activity that makes a community really vibrant. So we're going to be working as developers to bring in the kind of financing and working with the people that are already there as partners. So we're not trying to gentrify anybody out. We want folks to feel that the investment that they made in their own community is going to be there for them, you know, and for their grandkids as well. So we're very excited about working on that kind of project as well. Oh, and so, but another project we're starting on is, you know, we really had to think about just starting off and sort of going out with a bang. So one of our first projects was this former rail station. Cass Gilbert, the great American architect, designed a whole bunch of them, but Amtrak owned it, and they turned it into a little strip mall even after they got rid of rail service back in the 50s. And this is the first thing that anybody saw when they came into the community. Amtrak evicted all the tenants. They just didn't want to be a landowner, or excuse me, a landlord anymore. So they evicted all the tenants last year. And for someone who grew up in the neighborhood when most of the businesses were shuttered, having the first entry into your community be a shuttered building was, literally brought, the hair on the back of my neck stood on. It's really not that much. So it was really kind of, it was crazy. And so I was like, we have to do something. So I got in contact with Amtrak, and we're now in negotiations with them to acquire this building and turn it into a lifestyle destination, you know, with a restaurant, you know, and hopefully a spa as well. But in the meantime, we had to do something about it, about the way that it looked when it was shuttered and becoming really derelict. So we hired some young kids from the community to design a mural, you know, as the entree into the community. So this was the crew. And we wanted to work with them specifically because we wanted them to feel as though they were a part of the community's transformation. And we also wanted to empower them with, you know, economically as well, with a job. And but it was often the first kind of interaction that these young people had with actually visualizing a project and then bringing it to fruition. So first they had to survey the situation, and then They worked with professional artists to design a project that could be implemented within the time frame that we could allot to them, and then they executed. And what was so wonderful about this was that these kids got to be the heroes of the community because it was such a visible site, which was a huge landscape as well that they were working on, that everybody who walked by the site, which was everybody in the neighborhood on the way to the subway or to the shopping center or whatever, and they got to see and see themselves, as folks that were making an active change. And so this is what it looked like, sadly, when it was being shuttered. Now, and soon, when we develop the site and it becomes a destination that people want to be into and come to. This is one of my absolute favorite Dr. King's quotes because it was it's part of the letter from a Birmingham jail. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should. It speaks full volumes to what I believe to be true about the work that we all have in front of us. My friend Bill Clinton is known to say this lovely line that there'll never be no distance between where we are and where we ought to be, ever. There's always ways for us to move forward, but having that legitimate and unavoidable impatience to be the change maker, to see a problem, to know that there's a way to solve it, to make it better for folks, and to continue to make it be this amazing thing that you didn't even know could possibly happen. I'm sure it was the dream that made Dr. King understand that this was what you had to live and die for. And it is, I think, for all of us to feel the same exact way as we start to move through our life and see that change is possible. So again, Dr. King knew that it wasn't just about strictly racial justice or social justice or economic justice or just environmental justice. It was all of those things combined that created the totality of human experience and the quality of that life. And so to understand that we all have the capacity to help make that change is so crucially important for you to claim as your birthright to do something about. And not just when you get older, but right now. Think of yourself as that leader. Because we all, have seen those, tributes to all of our collective failures. But wouldn't you all rather be building monuments to hope and possibility? Yes, you can. Thank you.
Wasn't that great? Give her another great big hand. Wasn't that lovely? Thank you. Thank you so much. And in keeping with that same thoughts, let freedom reign.
Let's sing a song together. Let's raise our voices as one.
We can break the chains of division. There's so much work to be done.
People, a song can be silent.
It must.
It must be so loud and strong.
Let us all ring bells of freedom.
Sing it, Tristan.
And let them ring all day long.
Let freedom ring from every mountain top. Let freedom ring till all the hatred stops, and there will be a brighter day. Love will find a way. Let freedom bells ring.
Remember
Remember the girl in Mississippi
Oh, yes.
who had the strength to walk to school that day.
Rosa Parks was a special lady who would not give up her seat.
In the face of dark segregation, she went to jail to set her people free.
Yeah, yeah. From every mountain top, let freedom ring. Come on. Till all the hatred stops, and there will be a brighter day. Love will find a way. Let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. From every mountain top, let freedom ring. Till all the hatred stops, and there will be a brighter day. Love will find a way. Let freedom bells
Thank you very much. Now, for our last selection, we got a hot gospel number.
It was early one morning, just before the break of day. Jesus, he touched me, and he washed my sins away. I started running, I started shouting, and I had no time for doubting. I got something. It was early one morning, just before the break of day. Jesus, he touched me, and he washed my sins away. I started running, I started shouting, and I had no time for doubting. I got something.
from the Holy Ghost. Come on, choir. Holy Ghost. Holy Ghost. Save me. Holy Ghost. Set me. Holy Ghost. Took my down. Holy Ghost. I got something. from the Holy Ghost.
It was early one morning, just before the break of day.
Yeah.
Jesus, he touched me, and he washed my sins away. I started running, I started shouting, and I had no time for doubting. I got something.
I got something from the Holy Ghost. From the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost. The Holy moving down in my soul. I got the Holy Ghost. Moving down in my soul. Do you got the Holy Ghost? The Holy Ghost. Got the Holy Ghost. Let me see you clap your hands. Do you got the Holy Ghost? 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 Yeah, yeah. I got something from the Holy Ghost, from the Holy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Whoa. Got the Holy Ghost.
Yeah, I really want to follow that. That was a great night and a fantastic way to start these 24 hours I talked about. And for everybody involved, in particular to Majora, that was an amazing talk, and just proof that one person can change everything. Just fantastic. So, So we are through here. Obviously, if you were invited to the prayer breakfast, you need to have a ticket. And what time is that? At 8:30, and then we are back in here at 9 o'clock. At 9, what's that? Yeah, sorry, 9:30. So I will see you all here tomorrow, and thanks for a great evening. We're adjourned.